This creates a deep internal tension, a constant fear of doing the wrong thing. Many men aren't afraid of rejection itself. They're afraid of being misunderstood, of being labeled toxic for traits they were once praised for, of being told they're too much or not enough at the same time. This psychological pressure doesn't make men lazy. It makes them rigid. They start playing roles instead of being present. They memorize dating advice. They copy behaviors. They perform masculinity instead of embodying it. And performance always cracks under emotional stress. Inside, a quiet question keeps looping. What am I allowed to be? Am I allowed to be assertive without being controlling? Am I allowed to be vulnerable without losing attraction? Am I allowed to set boundaries without being called insecure? Because no one gives clear answers, men default to what feels safest: emotional suppression. They stop expressing confusion. They stop asking for clarity. They tell themselves they'll figure it out alone, just like they were taught. But isolation doesn't create understanding. It creates resentment. Men begin to feel invisible, unappreciated, replaceable. They see effort ignored, loyalty taken for granted, and emotional labor expected without recognition. And instead of talking about it, they withdraw. This withdrawal is often misinterpreted as indifference, immaturity, or lack of care. But underneath it is exhaustion, the fatigue of constantly monitoring oneself, the stress of walking on psychological eggshells. Men aren't struggling because women expect too much. They're struggling because they were never taught how to integrate emotional awareness with strength. They were taught one or the other: be tough or be emotional, be dominant or be kind. But modern relationships demand integration, and integration is hard when your identity was built on suppression. So men cope in unhealthy ways. Some chase validation through status. Some numb themselves with distraction. Some adopt extreme ideologies that promise certainty in a confusing world. All of it stems from the same wound: the fear of not knowing how to be enough in a way that feels authentic. And the most painful part of this struggle: men don't feel safe talking about it. Because vulnerability without guidance feels like exposure, and exposure feels dangerous when your worth has always been tied to control. So the struggle stays hidden, quiet, unspoken, but it shapes every interaction, every relationship, every attempt at connection. Men aren't failing modern expectations. They're carrying them alone without the tools to understand what's being asked of them. At the center of modern dating frustration, there's one problem no one wants to say out loud, because saying it forces responsibility instead of blame. Men are responding to what they believe women want, not to what women actually respond to. This gap is where confusion lives. Men listen to words, instructions, surface-level advice: be nice, be confident, be ambitious, be emotionally open, and they try to apply these like a checklist, assuming attraction works the same way logic does. But attraction isn't built on instruction. It's built on perception. Women don't respond to what a man claims about himself. They respond to how his presence makes them feel over time. And this is where most misunderstandings begin. A man can say he's confident, but if his confidence needs validation, it collapses the moment it's tested. A man can say he's emotionally available, but if he becomes defensive when challenged, his words lose meaning. A man can say he respects boundaries, but if his self-worth depends on being chosen, that respect turns into quiet resentment. Men often think effort equals value, so they give more time, more attention, more reassurance, more explanation, believing consistency alone creates attraction. But what they don't realize is that excessive effort without inner stability signals uncertainty, not devotion. This is the core problem. Men are overinvesting externally while underdeveloping internally. They're trying to convince instead of embody. They're explaining instead of demonstrating. They're chasing clarity instead of becoming grounded enough to not need it. Women sense this immediately, even if they can't articulate it. And when attraction fades, men feel blindsided. They say things like, "I did everything right," because from a task-based mindset they did. But relationships aren't task-based, they're state-based. Who you are emotionally sets the tone for how others feel around you. This is why men who do less often seem more attractive. Not because they care less, but because they are less reactive. Their self-worth isn't on the line with every interaction. Their identity isn't dependent on approval. The problem isn't that women expect men to read minds. The problem is that men were taught to focus on performance instead of presence. Presence can't be faked. It comes from self-trust, from emotional regulation. From knowing that rejection doesn't threaten your identity. When a man doesn't need to be chosen, he shows up differently. He listens without anxiety. He sets boundaries without anger. He expresses interest without attachment to outcome. That emotional posture is what women respond to, not the words used to describe it. So men get stuck in cycles. They chase validation. They get temporary attention. They lose attraction. They feel rejected. They blame the system, and the cycle repeats. The core problem isn't women changing their expectations. It's men misunderstanding what expectations actually mean. Women aren't asking men to be perfect communicators or emotional experts. They're asking men to be internally coherent, to match words with behavior, to match confidence with calm, to match strength with empathy, until men stop asking, "What do I need to do?" and start asking, "Who do I need to become?" The disconnect will remain. This problem can't be solved by better lines, better strategies, or better tactics. It's solved by aligning inner state with outer behavior. So attraction isn't something you chase, but something that naturally forms in your presence beneath all the debates, frustrations, and misunderstandings between men and women. There is a psychological truth that rarely gets discussed. Because it doesn't flatter anyone and it doesn't offer shortcuts, attraction today is rooted in emotional safety. Not comfort, not convenience, safety. Emotional safety doesn't mean a man never disagrees, never leads, or never challenges. It means his emotional world is stable enough that others don't feel they have to manage it for him. This is the shift most men underestimate. In the past, authority and certainty created safety. A man who took charge was automatically trusted. His emotional state was secondary to his ability to provide direction. But in a world where women no longer need direction to survive, emotional instability becomes visible and unattractive. Women are constantly scanning for signals, not consciously, but psychologically. How does he respond to stress? What happens when plans change? Does his tone shift when he feels insecure? Does he listen to understand or to defend? These micro moments reveal more than grand gestures ever could. The psychological truth is that women don't bond through logic. They bond through nervous system alignment. When a man is emotionally regulated, calm without being passive, confident without being forceful, it creates a sense of ease that words can't manufacture. This is why emotional reactions matter more than intentions. A man may intend to be loving, but if he becomes irritable when he doesn't feel appreciated, the intention disappears. A man may intend to be supportive, but if he withdraws during conflict, safety erodes. A man may intend to be strong, but if his identity fractures under criticism, that strength feels fragile. Women feel this before they think it. This is also why men who try to do everything right often struggle the most. They are hyper-focused on avoiding mistakes, which creates tension. That tension communicates anxiety. Anxiety communicates unpredictability. Unpredictability destroys safety. The psychological truth isn't about being emotionally expressive all the time. It's about emotional containment. Can you hold your emotions without leaking them onto others? Can you experience jealousy without acting from it? Can you feel anger without using it as a weapon or hiding from it? This capacity is rare because it requires self-awareness and discipline, not performance. Many men confuse emotional safety with approval. They think being agreeable creates connection, but safety doesn't come from compliance. It comes from consistency. A man who knows his values doesn't need to adjust himself to be accepted. He adjusts his behavior without abandoning himself. This is what creates trust. When a woman feels that a man's sense of self isn't dependent on her reactions, she relaxes. She doesn't feel pressured to reassure him. She doesn't feel responsible for his confidence. She doesn't feel like one wrong word could trigger withdrawal or conflict. That relaxation is attraction. The deepest psychological truth is this. Women aren't evaluating men on what they promise. They're evaluating men on how they manage themselves. Self-management signals maturity. Maturity signals safety. Safety opens the door to desire. This is why status, money, and appearance can attract attention, but rarely sustain connection. Without emotional regulation, they become distractions from instability. And this truth applies even when women can't explain why they're losing interest. It's not a checklist failure. It's a nervous system response. When emotional safety disappears, attraction quietly fades, even if everything looks perfect on paper. Understanding this truth shifts everything. It moves men away from trying to impress and toward learning how to be internally solid. Because attraction doesn't grow in chaos. It grows in calm that feels strong, grounded, and unshakable, so now the picture becomes clear. Women didn't suddenly become impossible to please. Men didn't suddenly become inadequate. What changed was the psychological landscape where attraction is formed. The world moved forward, but most men were never taught how to move inward. Modern expectations aren't about doing more, proving more, or sacrificing more. They're about alignment, about becoming a man whose inner world is steady enough that others feel safe stepping into it. When men understand this, resentment fades, confusion dissolves, the constant feeling of never being enough loses its grip, because attraction was never a reward for effort. It was always a response to presence. And the men who thrive in modern relationships aren't the loudest, richest, or most dominant. They are the ones who don't need to chase connection because they carry clarity within themselves. When a man stops trying to earn worth and starts embodying it, everything changes. Not because women lowered their expectations, but because he finally understood them.